good morning, everyone. This is Morning Coffee, and I am your host, Brooke Carlock. Thank you for being with us today. My guest is so amazing today. I actually wrote down an introduction that I'm going to read to you because I didn't want to forget anything, because she is just an important person in the grief community, and I want to do her justice. So I am so excited to be joined by Rebecca Feinglos. She's the founder of Grieve Leave, which is a community that is all about helping people make space to process their grief. Her journey has been incredible. By the age of 31, Rebecca lost both of her parents and had gone through a divorce. And in response, I think she did what every grieving person wishes they could do. And it took a year off to focus solely on her grief. Now she has a community of over 30,000 grievers and is helping to change the conversation around grief like we do here. So we appreciate that. She's been featured in some crazy places like Time, Huffington Post, Newsweek, and she also hosts a monthly meet and grief event for people. And she is here today to talk to us about grief in the workplace, which I am very excited about because I don't think we've had an episode where we have talked about grief in the workplace on here. So I'm looking forward to that because I have some opinions on the subject. So here we go. Welcome, Rebecca. Thank you for joining me.
Oh my gosh, Brooke, thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad I was off camera because nothing is more awkward than like listening to someone talk about you. And I'm just like, thank you.
You are so welcome. Thank you for being on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
So happy to be here this morning.
Yeah. So I think I just kind of want to start with your journey a little bit so that my viewers can get to know you. I know all about your life and I know how amazing Grieve Leave is, but just in case other people do not, so let's kind of start a little bit with your own journey and what inspired you to take your year-long sabbatical, which then led to Grieve Leave.
Oh my gosh. Wait, first I want to tell you what I'm drinking.
Yes. Mine's always the same, so sometimes I forget to ask.
Well, because I hate coffee, which is a fun fact about me. But I'm drinking tea this morning.
Okay.
Because I pursue many alternate sources of caffeine that aren't coffee because I need
them.
This says, "Don't forget that you're a badass" in Spanish. And I actually got it in Mexico City. I think it was Mexico City during my year of Grieve Leave I traveled that area to learn more about Day of the Dead. And
that is amazing.
Many Latin American cultures think about death. It's been a hell of a journey, Brooke. It's been incredible. And I think my life is such a balance of like, man, a lot of people have died in my family. And there's also still an immense amount of privilege that I have. Like you said, to be able to take a year away from work is such a blessing. And I'm very grateful that I can do that. Could do that. I lost my mom to glioblastoma as the deadliest form of brain cancer. She died when I was a little kid. Well, she was diagnosed when I was 5. She died when I was 13. But anyone who's watching or listening, you know that when someone is diagnosed with any kind of like brain degenerative anything is just a lot of suffering. So
that's a long time too for someone to be sick and for you to be experiencing that
at like the prime early childhood ages, you know?
I mean, that's like when you really need a mom.
Apparently. And I didn't even realize that I was really grieving for her because that was my norm. Like the norm in my household was a mother who couldn't mother, who was so unwell cognitively, physically, and then eventually just wasn't there anymore and died, that I spent my entire childhood and then academic and then early professional career just hustling and like working to fill what in retrospect was totally a void from grief, of not having this person in my life and just trying to out hustle it and outwork it. And things were going quite well. I got married somewhere in there. And then I was working in we were talking earlier about how you are an educator now. I started my career as an educator and then moved into public policy and government. And I was working in state government when COVID lockdown was announced. And I was the senior
Those were great times in education.
Oh my God. I was the senior most person in our Department of Health and Human Services who had a teaching background.
Wow.
And so I was really I was going in on March 14th, 2020 to help write the executive order and details for how we were going to shut down schools across North Carolina. I called my dad on the way in that Saturday morning because I was like, Dad, guess what I'm going to go do? What a weird day. And he was like, that's amazing. Love you. And 2 hours later, I got the call that my dad had died suddenly without any warning. And that kind of set off, as you can imagine, a lot of deep introspection in my life concurrently with leading all of this COVID response work in education in North Carolina. Long story short, having 2 dead parents at the age of 31 and being stuck in lockdown will really make you realize when your marriage isn't working. So I left my marriage. Yeah, that's like a whole nother podcast episode.
Yeah,
it relationships is. And that also plays into our workplaces and how we grieve. But anyway, I won't get ahead of myself. I decided to end my marriage, which was a good choice. But came with its own grief. And then I felt incredibly overwhelmed by it all. It was a lot of compounded grief over time. And I left my job and started blogging about grief. And I had no idea that it would turn into what it has. But I'm so grateful to have conversations like this one and to do the work that I do now.
Was your dad's death unexpected, or was he ill? Was that like a surprise?
Totally unexpected. Yeah, complete surprise. Terrible surprise. He my late father was a physician. And in the days leading up to COVID lockdown, he had been short of breath a little bit. And we didn't really know what COVID was.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of making jokes that because I'm the Feinglos family, Brooke, we have an incredibly dry sense of humor. And so some of the last texts to my father literally were, oh, man, maybe you have this COVID thing. Why don't you go home and close the door and never breathe on anyone ever again?
Oh my gosh.
But dry, funny.
Yeah.
Not at all funny in retrospect because it's holy shit.
Right. But at the time, yeah.
But at the time, dry sense of humor, fine. Dad tested negative for COVID post-mortem. So I had him tested and he didn't have it. Maybe he had it in the weeks before, but he died of 2 pulmonary emboli, blood clots, one in each lung that were contributing to some respiratory symptoms throughout the week. He was going to go in for a CT scan on Monday. He had been to the pulmonologist Friday evening. Yeah. And he was gone. So don't recommend losing a parent. But I will tell you, though, if I had to choose, this is awful, but he went the way he would have wanted to, quickly, without suffering, in the home he loved. And he wasn't a burden,
You know what? I can totally relate to that because my dad died of a heart attack on the side of the road driving home from work. And it was totally unexpected. But my mom had cancer and she took it was 14 months for her, so shorter than what you had to go through. But yeah, I would definitely take the heart attack over the 14 months of pancreatic cancer. So
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, same. No, I just relate to so much of what you are saying because my daughter died. It was 2022. Yeah, and same thing with the marriage. And after my daughter died, I know this podcast is not about me, it's about you, but just
stop. No, it matters.
I was like, oh my gosh, because the same thing, it was my second marriage. And as soon as Libby died in 2022, I was like, I'm done. It just sort of opened my eyes and I was like, nope, I can't do I cannot.
You
do
gave me
this
emotional
anymore.
Immediately. Because it's when you go through grief, you go through a loss, you go through conflict with your partner, you either grow together or you don't. right?
Yep.
Like a conflict makes you reevaluate. You are testing every single limit of that relationship. And honestly, let me tie this into the workplace. I'm going to do it because it makes you reevaluate all kinds of relationships in your life. It makes you reevaluate how you interact with people and how you are like spending your days and spending your time. And that includes our workplaces too. Like it made me reevaluate. Here's an example. I remember getting emails marked urgent in the months after my dad had died. Some of them legitimately, I mean, we were dealing in COVID response. People were dying. Some of those emails were absolutely urgent. Some of them were like a damn Excel spreadsheet that needed review. And I just found myself so angry and looking at these emails being like, this isn't urgent. Nothing is actually urgent ever again, because I know what an urgent phone call is. It is that my dad has died. That is the peak of urgency. And I knew by the end of 2021, after working in that environment for a year and a half after I'd lost my dad, I was like, no, I can no longer work in this environment because the way that I connect with my work isn't the same as it was before my dad died. And that happens to a lot of people, but I think it's the same idea with marriages and friendships. And we reevaluate how we show up with people we care about and like professionally too.
Yeah. And for me, it was like I overhauled pretty much everything except for work because I needed to work. Like I told you, I was a teacher.
You need the anchor.
I got divorced like right after Libby died because like I said, that switch flipped and I was like, I'm done trying to make this work. And then it was just all of a sudden I was no longer a wife. My sons were older. So I was pretty much within a few months, I was an empty nester. I had this big house that I was like, why am I in this big house all by myself?
Like hence tiny home. This
and now I'm in a tiny house. Yeah. So I just kind of like blew everything up.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Except for the work. And that was because I didn't get a choice. I had to keep paying the mortgage. I had to feed my sons. Like I was the one who was providing everything at that point. So I had no options really. I did get child support. So I'm grateful for that. But like, it was a lot. And I remember how angry and frustrated I was that I could not take more time off after losing all of those people, because all the people that I said that I lost, and I didn't even add my stepmom, that was within 18 months of each other that I lost all those people and got no time off. I had a month and I had to use like a special sick bank for the month that I got. And then it was just like, nope, if you don't come back, you're losing your job or you get paid like a ridiculously low % of what you're supposed to be getting paid.
And like, of course, we treat your grief as if it is over after that month, because that month is absolute. Like grief is I'm being incredibly sarcastic, everyone. Grief is this linear, compartmentalized thing. And then you use your leave and then you are finished with it. And you can go back to be I imagine, very spunky, wonderful teacher that you were before all of these losses. That is how our systems are designed. If you even get any bereavement leave at all.
Yeah. I know I was lucky for having that sick bank and being able to take a month, because I know people that can't take a month. With my parents, it was a few days. And then it's like, you're just supposed to.
I didn't know I didn't have bereavement leave until my dad died. I assumed, God, I learned a hell of a lot after my dad died about things that I imagine the average person listening to this conversation has experienced a loss. And so maybe you already know your workplace's policies around death and around grief more broadly. But the average person, when you like go into a new workplace, you're probably not asking them like, what are your grief related policies? What are your bereavement policies? You never think about it until you are in the moment of crisis.
Yeah.
And so I found out I didn't have bereavement leave as a state employee the few days after my dad died, when my boss and I were talking regularly. And she basically was calling HR to figure out, the question was, how many days is our bereavement policy? So we could figure out how we were going to piece together my leave. And I remember her calling me and saying, hey, we don't actually have bereavement leave. That's not a thing for state employees. By the way, and that includes teachers in North Carolina. Fun fact, they don't have bereavement leave either. And for me, I had worked overtime like a crazy person for years in my role. And so I had leave accrued. I took a month off of work officially and paid leave when my dad died because I was, I guess you could call that lucky enough to have worked all of those insane hours well ahead of COVID, and I could use them. And my manager allowed me to use them all in sequence like that. Right. But the average person, state employees in North Carolina do not get bereavement leave. Most states across the country do not require bereavement leave. It is up to private sector employers. It is up to counties. If you're, say, like a public school teacher, it might be up to a school district, what the terms are, if you get bereavement leave and how long it is. On average, for most people in America, it's 2 to 5 days, which is hilarious to me because you can't even like plan a funeral.
It's insanity. It is complete insanity. So what was it? Was that kind of the point where you started getting interested in workplace grief, or what was it that kind of led you to specifically, I know you focus on other areas as well, but what particularly interested you in that area?
What a wonderful question, and a really important one. I believe, and what I see in working in grief support in the United States, is that de facto, the number one place that we receive any kind of grief support is actually from our workplaces. And they're not very good at it. If you are going through a loss in America right now, you are talking to your friends and family, maybe, about that loss. Maybe if your person died from an extended illness, like my mom or like your mom, maybe there is grief support provided by the hospital or a hospice. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe there is grief support provided by a religious community near you. If you are me and you are in your 30s and you are looking for grief support, particularly in the Southern United States, first of all, you're just not going to find it. But if you do, it is through a hospice or it is through a church. And those are the only two places that you can find grief support. So de facto, what happens is folks are going to work every day after a loss. Their boss is in the loop about the loss. They had to be in the loop because you had to figure out time off. And your colleagues might be in the loop. But de facto, what is happening is you are probably being ignored in your workplace. People don't know how to talk to you. Maybe you are sent to go to an EAP support, some kind of employee assistance program. You're taking some kind of a module. Maybe there is someone from HR who's been assigned to you to check in once, maybe. And that's about it. That is what grief support looks like in America. And it can be so much better than that. And so I came in, Brooke, mad. I mean, I was mad that bereavement leave isn't a given across the country. I am mad that it is not a federal policy. And my background as an educator, as a policymaker, and now as a really experienced griever, I really wanted to spend time supporting our workplaces on how to create better policies and, frankly, just teaching people how to talk to each other about the grief that is already happening. We just pretend like it's not. So I think it's essential that we do more in our workplaces to support grieving employees.
It absolutely is. I mean, thank you so much for being interested and for any work that you're doing in this area, because I know how it felt for me going back after a month after losing my daughter and like having to stand in front of a room full of 8th graders all day long with this fake face on, pretending like I was okay, trying to be professional, when obviously it is the worst time in my entire existence. And I felt so far from okay. And I just had to compartmentalize everything. It was so unhealthy. And you're so right. It's like, I used to chuckle because I'd get so many of the like, let me know if I can do anything. And I wanted to be like, well, you could have let me stay home. Like, you could have,
Thanks.
and especially in school districts, it's so like, okay, I love my district. I'm not putting my district down. I think it's this way just in school systems everywhere, where it's like you can have a teacher who does something wrong, like they're not supposed to do, and then they get put on like paid leave to stay home. And I'm like, wait a second. These people that are doing inappropriate things are getting paid to stay home. And I just lost my mom, my stepmom, my dad, and my daughter, and I have to come back to work right away. Like, what is wrong?
I bet that means you're a damn good teacher, first of all.
Like,
and like, it is so messed up. And the way that we treat employees who are going through grief is like, we're not wired in America to treat them as human. We treat grief as this thing that we work through in linear stages. We compartmentalize. If there's anything like left of your grief, like put that away, no crying at work. And we've just decided that grief isn't workplace appropriate. Honestly, like that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. You will have it just literally doesn't make sense.
No.
Where's our grief supposed to go? Like, what are we supposed to do? And actually, like, if we made space for our grief, for our feelings, for our humanity in our workplaces, we'd probably do better work in the long run. We would probably stay at a workplace as opposed to quitting it, which is anecdotally, there's not great data on how many people quit their jobs within a year after a loss, but at least anecdotally, something like 50% of people within a year, they quit.
Yeah.
And that is because you don't feel supported in your workplace. That is solvable. We can absolutely better support our employees. And it's, first of all, by treating them as human. Like, who knew?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I mean, I guess that leads us to kind of a loaded question, but
is any question about grief not loaded?
Oh, that's true. I feel like this is a quiz question, but like, what do we do? Like, what would a grief-informed workplace look like?
Oh, I love talking about this. So just to like go bird's eye view here for a second.
Yeah.
I spend my time leading my company, leading Grieve Leave, in a variety of different ways. I host grief support groups. We produce a lot of educational content online. We have a podcast. We do all kinds of things. I love, though, that I get to spend a ton of my time training workplaces of all different kinds globally on how to create more grief-informed work environments. And that ranges from like small nonprofits to large international banks. And I think when the average person like signs up to come to a training, or maybe they're told they have to come to that training, they are imagining they are going to get talked about or talked to about bereavement leave and like something really squishy to talk about their feelings, maybe. And like they don't want to go. Grief-informed workplaces come down to multiple different factors, but to me, more than anything, it's changing how we talk to each other. Like, yes, bereavement leave is important. Flexible leave, so you can take time off for a death anniversary, for example, or you can take more than 2 to 3 days of leave right when the loss happens, extending the idea of leave beyond an immediate family member. Like, yes, bereavement leave, flexible leave, that's so important. But what I spend the most of my time doing is teaching managers how to talk to colleagues who are managers how to talk to direct reports who are returning from leave, or colleagues to talk to other colleagues who are returning after a loss, or teaching colleagues how to talk to each other when a colleague is going through the grief of a divorce. Because, oh my God, like people shy away from talking about someone's death-related loss in a workplace. Heaven forbid we talk about the grief of divorce too. Yeah. That has no place right now in our workplaces, but it could. So those trainings look like teaching people how to name the grief elephant in the room. So a really simple example of that is when you come back to work after the loss of Libby, someone in your workplace, instead of just literally avoiding you or talking to you, is it like truly avoiding you because people are
Oh my
nervous. They
gosh,
don't know what to
that
say.
is, yeah.
They don't, it happens all the time. Instead of avoiding you, they have language to come up to you and hug you and say, Brooke, I am so sorry about the loss of your daughter.
Yeah.
Name it. A B, I don't even want to give this a B plus, maybe like a C plus alternative to that would be like, Brooke, I'm so sorry for what happened. Like even just naming that something happened is fine. Yeah. But the best thing to do is to acknowledge the griever's grief. And that in itself is like a revolution in our workplaces. Yeah. Because we barely know how to do that outside of work. We barely talk to people who are grieving outside. But in our workplaces, it becomes way more important. Yeah. I also think it's teaching a mindset too that grief is workplace appropriate, because de facto you cannot compartmentalize your grief and leave it at home.
Right. Yes.
You literally can't. You might try, but your grief impacts your team. It impacts, in your case, it impacts your students, whether you wanted to or not. No matter how hard you are trying, it doesn't mean you are a bad teacher. It doesn't mean you're a bad employee. You are literally grieving.
Yeah.
And so of course it's going to affect your work. Let's learn how to give ourselves grace and learn how to give each other grace when we're grieving so we can get back stronger.
Yeah. It was funny. I noticed that there were the people, a lot of the people who had been through grief themselves were much more likely to come up and give me the hug and that kind of stuff. But people who hadn't, I actually just talked about this in a video that I just did, because I made the comment that I feel like now it's been a little over 2.5 years since I lost Libby. Like just now I'm starting to notice some of the people that I feel like have been avoiding me. Like they'd see me walking down the hallway and like make a beeline somewhere else because they didn't know what to say. And I feel like it's been enough time. Like I'm just hitting that thing where people feel like they can be like, hey, how was your weekend? And something totally innocuous.
2.5 years.
Yes. And like not feeling like they have to bring up my losses, you know, when they run into me in the hallway.
Dude, what you're describing is just a really interesting kind of two sets of extremes when we go back to work. So one is, again, people just outright avoiding you and pretending like you don't exist because they're worried that they're going to say the wrong thing to you, so they say nothing. Yeah. Or they're somehow worried that like your grief is contagious. And, you know, if they imagine like to acknowledge your grief, Brooke, means they have to imagine themselves in that situation. Yeah. And for someone that hasn't been through loss, that is way too effing scary. Mm-hmm. But for people who have been through loss, we already know. We can sit in your pain. We can sit with you. We can acknowledge your loss because we have gotten through our own. Like we know the scariness. Exactly. We can sit with yours. So that's one extreme, is people just like straight up don't talk to you. And then on the other extreme is people talk to you like too much about your loss, and they pity you. And they might be like putting their hand on your shoulder and saying like, how are you? How are you doing? And it's that tone, that really pitying tone that's just like infuriating. I'm like, I'm fine. My daughter's dead still. Mm-hmm. My dad's dead still. Like, what do you want me to say? Right? Like, it's so frustrating. Yeah. So I think we can find a happy, like normal medium in between those two things. I don't want someone's pity at work, especially. I want you to treat me like a colleague, like a professional, and hold space for the fact that I am also grieving. Both things can be true at the same time.
I wish everyone could take a class in that, like speaking to a grieving person 101.
Oh my God. I mean, this is what I do. This is literally what I do. So I love, but it's like, to you and me, it's probably so damn basic and intuitive as grievers. And as I'll speak for myself as a very loud griever. Like we speak up a lot, right?
Yeah.
It is so scary for people to sit in on a training about grief or to talk about grief who haven't experienced it.
Yeah.
You have to confront your own fears.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what would you recommend, like when you're speaking with, owners or managers or directors or whoever's in charge about how to make the workplace a better place for grief? What are some things that you tell them to do or say?
Yeah. First of all, I would ask them to evaluate their leave policies first and foremost. Like analyze every policy you have in your workplace that impacts someone who is going through a loss. And I really encourage them to think about death-related losses and something like a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to name that outright, although I know that's not necessarily the focus of this conversation, but grief and our divorces absolutely impact us at work. The logistics that I had to go through of changing health insurance dependents, changing my last name on my work email. There were so many different pieces where just who's invited to the holiday party, right? like there's so many moments that your divorce absolutely shows up at work. And we have so much shame around talking about divorce, period, that I think our workplaces should go an extra mile and really think about what are the logistical and practical weights and the emotional weights on someone going through a divorce at work. The second person I called after my brother when I got divorced, because everyone was dead in my family, so I couldn't call my parents, was my boss, because I knew that I was about to block off hours during work hours for legal proceedings. And I was like, hey, heads up, it's about to be hard.
Yeah.
And like that, so then that transitions to like the most practical thing and the most practical advice in terms of like what we say to each other that I give to workplaces is name the fact that you're grieving. Use the word grief. Name the loss. Name the hard thing that you're going through. I could ask for the day off on March 14th every year.
Yeah.
If I wanted to. And I never actually have to disclose that it's my dad's death anniversary to my boss. But I could ask for that day off. The harder thing for me to do is to say, hey, can I have this day off? It's my father's death anniversary. And that is a tough day for me to show up at work as my best self. When I name that, when I use language that names my grief to my superior, it creates an opportunity for them to support me more. It opens up an opportunity for conversation. And then vice versa, if we are thinking about how managers and colleagues can talk to someone who is grieving, it comes down to the language that we use and the space that we create for those really real conversations. So let's say we're coming up, which is crazy to me, that's the end of September. We're coming up around holiday season. So if you manage people and let's say you have a team and you have regular team meetings, as we roll into the holidays, let's say mid-October, end of October, you could say in one of those team meetings, hey, I know the holidays can be a really tough time of year for many of us. It's also a celebratory time of year, but it can be really hard for those of us who have lost loved ones. I'm going to be checking in on every single one of you on your well-being and on, if you've gone through a loss recently or long ago, how I can be here to support you over the holidays. That boss naming that is like revolutionary. And then following through is important. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. And I feel like, unfortunately, for a lot of people, if they would, to go back to your, taking off the day of the death anniversary, I think a lot of people feel like they'll be looked down on for that. Like people are afraid because you kind of, I don't know if it makes you look like you're not a good employee. Like, is that important enough to take off of work? Like, and there's still a sense of shouldn't you be okay by now?
Shouldn't I be done with my grief?
Yeah, like, shouldn't you be over it by now? Like, why does your daughter's death day still bother you? You know,
like how dare you continue to feel heaviness
Like,
on these?
why aren't you stronger? Yeah. So
I feel like we have to get out of our own heads about that. Like, first of all, as grievers, all of us, everyone listening who has lost a person, you already know that your grief did not end because that person was buried. Yeah. You know your grief didn't end. You know that. And particular days in the calendar days, seasons, God, Mother's Day, Father's Day. Oh my God, I'm going to cry just like thinking about those days. The holidays of all kinds, your birthday. Like, these are days where if you are showing up at work on those days, you're already not your best self. It's already not happening. Give yourself the day. Go sleep. Go sleep if you can. And if you can't, it would be really radical if you did acknowledge to your colleagues and to your boss that these are hard days for you. I'm like looking straight to camera because I'm like, oh my God, name your grief. Name your grief to your colleagues and your bosses. Let them be there to support you. For your daughter's death anniversary, Libby, I am imagining that if your colleagues knew it was her death anniversary, I could see that, and you had to come to work, I could see them bringing you cookies. I could see them wanting to like sit with you at lunch to do something. I could see, this is a longer conversation, but like thinking about if your students knew that it was Libby's death anniversary, like I could see parents and students acknowledging it too. Yeah. But that only happens when we tell people that these days are heavy. That only happens when we acknowledge that we're grieving. No one will know otherwise.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I completely agree. And I do this all the time. And I know that there are a lot of people that don't, and I wish they would, but like I tell my students, like I've told my students every year when I had to come back right away, I was so honest with them. And I'm like, look, this is not something you just get over. Like, it's something I'm going to be dealing with. And I've said that every year since she died. And this year is her class in 8th grade. So her classmates and friends are in my class and I see them every day. And I flat out told them at the beginning of the year, I was like, Libby should be sitting here with you guys, and she's not. And that is really, really hard for me. And it's going to be really hard on every Libby day this year, knowing that she's not here, you know, and she's not in this 8th grade with you. And I feel like it's so, so important to tell people those things. And I think a lot of people shy away because, oh, I don't want people to feel sorry for me or, you know, feel like I'm milking my grief for pity or whatever. It's like, no, I'm human. Like, this is what humans go through when they have this deep grief. And I think we need to make it more normalized. I'm going to put up a comment here. We have a comment from Rachel who says, I still notice that people just don't want to hear about your loss, which absolutely, there are so many people who are uncomfortable talking about it. So then we don't want to say anything because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. And then, sorry, she continued here. They avoid talking about it. It's frustrating that they don't want to listen about your heart that aches, not for a second. So yeah, do you have anything to say to Rachel there?
Can I just say, first of all, Brooke, thank you for acknowledging the grief that you feel in particular with your class this year. And just thank you for sharing that. And
of course,
what a beautiful model that you're providing to your students of like what it means to be a human being. And that is the best education that you could ever give them. And that is honestly, like, thinking about years later, what they're going to remember, that is something that they are going to remember you modeling for them.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. And then tell me again, what was the name of the person who commented?
Rachel talking about how people, and this is, we can apply this to the workplace or just in general, is that people are uncomfortable hearing about it.
I have a potential reframe for you, Rachel, that like, it sucks. People often don't want to, I'm going to reframe this language, but people don't want to hear about the loss. Let's reframe it to they're really scared to hear about your loss. They're so scared because if they hear about your loss and they are talking to you about it and they are seeing the pain that you're in, they have to think about their own lives and that could be true for them one day. And oh my God, that is just way too overwhelming for some people.
Yeah.
Especially if they haven't experienced this. Well, this is probably only happening if they haven't experienced a significant loss themselves. Though caveat, sometimes it can be really hard when you are grieving a loss to hear about someone else's loss that maybe is similar to your own. So that's kind of another, it just depends on the griever. But I encourage you to think about like how afraid people are to talk about grief, and that this comes incrementally over time. It comes with building these a workplace culture where you talk about all kinds of hard things, not just death, not just grief, but like you acknowledge your humanity often. I think also, I haven't said this out loud yet in this conversation, but in workplace trainings, this comes up a bunch. There's two really common questions that I get.
Okay.
One is like, I don't want to treat, like, work isn't therapy. My colleagues aren't my therapists. Right. My colleagues aren't my friends. Like, this feels like totally inappropriate to bring into the workplace.
Okay.
And maybe,
yes, I can see that.
And maybe in this example, Rachel, maybe that person that is like giving you some kind of indication that they don't want to talk to you about your loss, maybe that's what they're thinking. Maybe they're thinking like, whoa, like, I am not your therapist. So then so there's like that argument. So I'll come back to that. And then the other argument that I get often is, well, if I talk about my grief at all in the workplace, I won't be able to stop crying. Yeah. I won't be able, I call that the floodgates argument. It's like once you open up that can of worms at all, that it's just like Pandora's box. Like you can't, floodgates are open.
Right.
So in response to this first piece, like, you're right. Your colleagues aren't your best friends, probably. Maybe some of them are. And your manager certainly isn't your therapist. But there is a difference between pretending like we're not human and being just people together in an office or in a workplace or at a school, wherever it is, that is nuanced. Yeah. So that means that we do not, and there's no like clear black and white on this. It means that we don't necessarily like vent about all of our grief to our colleague, but we can absolutely acknowledge that we're in pain on a given day.
Yeah. Rachel said, I never thought of that. Thank you. So
yeah. And then the floodgates argument too. So this idea of like, if maybe the colleague is like, oh my God, like I can't hear about their loss. Maybe you are like, I can't talk about my loss because it's too overwhelming. I won't be able to stop. I just don't think that's true. I think if you give yourself 5 minutes to like go cry in the bathroom and you need to cry because something reminded you of your dad or of your daughter, go cry and then come back. You will feel better. You will feel a little bit lighter. Like give your grief a little space at work. I just don't think the floodgates argument is a real thing.
I hear that so much just in general with grief, like people who are in, grief counseling or therapy or whatever, they bring up the fact that they try not to feel their grief because they're afraid if they do, again, the floodgates, like it won't be able to stop. But yeah, from experience, I've had those moments where I've, been upset. I haven't had like a real tearjerker moment where I was like sobbing at school, but I have definitely had like the choke up, tears in my eyes moments. I can tell you from my experience, one of the nicest and best things that coworkers have done for me is not like listening to me bawl or, complain about everything that I'm feeling at the moment, but just coming and saying to me, like, if you need a minute, I'll cover your class. Like if you need a minute, go take it. I've got your back. And that it just knowing that you have people that you can just be like, I don't even need to tell you what it is. I just need to go take a second to collect myself. And that has been invaluable.
Oh, I love that you brought that up, Brooke, right? Like as a griever, find your trusted people at work. Yeah. Doesn't have to be everybody, but know who your people are that either have offered you that kind of support outright, not the empty, let me know if you need anything. These are the people who say things to you like, hey, do you want to get lunch on this day? Like, let's
Yep.
go sit together. Like, they want to be with you, or they are offering to lighten your workload at a given time. Those are the people that you can trust. Spend your time talking to them, as opposed to like, yeah, there are going to be some people like the ones that Rachel brought up. Like, there are going to be some people in your workplace that are not going to be receptive to this idea. It's too scary for them. And that's okay. I don't like, that's hard. And one day they will understand, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And if you don't mind, I'm going to throw out also, because I just think that because I have experience in this topic, having gone back to work and experienced grief in the workplace for a while now, just some of the things that were helpful for me.
Yeah, please.
For me, it was my superintendent, but you know, it would be the same for any sort of boss or manager or whatever. I am pretty sure that she wrote down like the big days. So on like Libby's birthday and Libby's death day and whatever, she would send me a message. It wasn't like, you don't have to come into work today, unfortunately, but it was just acknowledging it. Like, I know this day is probably hard for you. Just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking about it. And
dude, that's huge.
Isn't that so
that's
nice?
Huge.
The other thing she would do is if something happened in the district with like, unfortunately, we've had two instances since Libby died that another student has died, and both of them were like long illnesses. They weren't unexpected like Libby's was, but she would send me like a warning ahead of time to say, hey, I'm going to be sending out this notice to the district that this child passed away and that there's counseling available. And I just wanted to let you know before I send it out that it's coming so you can be prepared. I'm like, you have no idea how much that means to have that. And it's just simple things like that. I mean, I think if you can't go in and just, you know, ram down the door banging about, you know, how much bereavement leave you have, which we absolutely need to change, just simple things like that, just being a kind human means so much to people who are in grief.
I'm obsessed with this specific example. Shout out to that superintendent.
Yeah.
A piece of advice that I offer to managers when I do specific trainings for managers is to plug into your Outlook calendar or your Google Calendar or whatever, those heavy grief days. Because then you can be thinking about it a week before, even for that person. You can be not to pity your direct report, but to treat them as a human being and to acknowledge like, hey, this day might be a hard day. And just, you know, I know we're coming up on March 14th or whatever the date is, like, know that I'm thinking about you. And let's think about what we can do for your schedule over the next couple of weeks. Man, a manager that says something like that, because they plug those dates into their calendar, that's huge. Colleagues can do that too. You can do that to support your colleagues. You can plug in a death anniversary of a workplace colleague and acknowledge that heavy day in the exact same way. You could literally just bring your colleague coffee on that heavy day and not even say why, because y'all both already know.
Yes, it's just simple things like that. I have another comment here from Love to Love. This one breaks my heart. It's barely 5 months since I lost my daughter. She was 9. I feel your pain so much. My colleagues try to avoid talking about her, and I hate the pity they give me. I'm still struggling. At 5 months, I don't know what you can say to anyone at 5 months to stop the struggling, because you should be struggling right now. And I just send you all my love and support. But workplace wise, do you have anything to throw in there?
I'm so sorry for the loss that you've experienced. I think, Brooke, you just said it well. You should be struggling.
Yeah.
Like, that makes you human. This is not something to move on from. This is not something to compartmentalize. Your grief is going to show up at work, whether your colleagues want that to be true or not.
Exactly.
I have 2 tiny thoughts. Some ways that we can make space for our grief at work, like physically. And maybe you already do this, so ignore me if these are already things you're doing for yourself. Put up pictures of your loved one at work. Like, put up their picture on your desk. That does a couple things. One, that gives you just some moments to like remember your person throughout the day and gives you a visual and like something to look at and anchor those moments of grief and like looking at your person. But also for your colleagues, they see your person when they come to your workspace. It creates a moment where they can enter in conversation with you about your person. So if you put up a picture of your daughter, they can ask you about your daughter, and maybe they're too scared to do it otherwise. They don't know how to bring it up organically, but they see the picture and maybe they say something about it. And then the other thing that I want to offer is creating space for our own grief at work can look as simple as having a journal nearby, like in your desk, or if you're working remotely, it can be like your notes app in your phone, to just jot down feelings when you are struggling. If you are feeling frustrated that your colleagues are not acknowledging your grief and your grief suddenly becomes like overwhelming, give it some space, write down what you are feeling, name it, and that will lighten the grief a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and the other thing I would throw out to our commenter, and just for everyone in general, people ask me all the time how I address people if they ask me, you know, like just in the hallway, hey, how are you doing? How was your weekend? I urge people to be as honest as you can. I mean, there are the situations where if I'm in a hurry, oh, it was okay, thanks for asking, you know, and you keep going and you kind of have to judge the situation. But sometimes I don't sugarcoat how I'm feeling. And there have been quite a few times this year, like at the start of the year, people will say, hey, how's your year going? And my typical response would have been like, oh, it's okay. They're kind of rowdy, or you're a teacher, so you know, like it's early in the year, so I'm still waiting to see. But this year I've just been telling people like, oh, I'm kind of struggling this year because it's Libby's class. And I think the more that people do that and they see that they can survive those little like mini conversations, the more it kind of, I don't want to say trains them, but the more comfortable they feel asking those kind of questions. Because I think so many people avoid it because they don't want someone to be like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible, and start crying. But if they learn that, hey, I can ask someone and get, you know, an answer that they're not sobbing and I don't have to run and hide afterwards, that
we can hold it, right?
Yes,
we can hold it all. That like, rather than just pretending like we are all fine all the time and like walk down the hallway and like, how are you? Good. I'm good. Cool. Bye. Like, rather than spend our energy hiding what is actually going on in our lives, when we choose to be vulnerable in the moments when it makes the most sense to do it, right? So maybe some of those hallway interactions, if you're going, you know, to gym or lunch with your students, are not the best time for you to be like, whew, man, this weekend was really hard. Maybe it's in, you know, the workroom, or maybe it's somewhere else, literally around the water cooler. I want to just put a pin in talking about remote work and what this can look like for remote work. And let's come back to that. But it means that we are acknowledging like through these little moments, just real vulnerability. And it's a really powerful thing to do to create a culture of support and an empathetic workplace culture. That is what a grief-informed workplace culture looks like. It's all of those little moments, they add up. That is harder to do. I'm going to take the pin down in a remote environment.
Because I didn't even consider actually how this would all apply to that.
So a couple thoughts there. One, that looks like creating intentional, like, I want to call it downtime conversations, but creating opportunities for teams to come together just for socializing and just for getting to know each other. Maybe that means you have a weekly team meeting virtually, and maybe it is your ritual every, you know, second meeting of the month that you spotlight a person and you get to know them and people can ask questions about this person on their team. Or you have a weekly tradition in those team meetings that's like, hey, on a scale of, you know, 1 to 10, what's your level of comfort today? And why? In a sentence. Or give me a word to describe how you're showing up today. Or what's your color today? I mean, this is like such a teacher-student thing, but
it is that, I do stuff like that with my students.
Are you green, yellow, or red today? You don't even have to say why, but just like creating that kind of culture in your workplace, you can do that remotely, makes a huge difference in the long run.
I love that. Oh my goodness, Rebecca. We are like, that just
my God, it's almost noon. Stop. When did that happen?
That is crazy. But for our listeners, how can they find out more about you, find stuff that you have to offer?
You can find us like everywhere. Go to grieveleave.com. That's GrieveLeave.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Stay tuned for our events that we host once a month, sometimes virtually, sometimes in person for grief support. You can follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, follow us on TikTok. But most of all, I want to tell you about the Griefed Up podcast, which has launched because I'm join your ranks, Brooke, and like there's so much beauty in grief, in normalizing conversations around grief in audio and visual form like this, because you can listen to them anywhere. And the Griefed Up podcast is very much like this kind of vibe. Like we are chilling, talking to real people who have experienced loss or who are experts in all different kinds of loss, whether death or non-death related grief. I just talked to a former professional basketball player the other day, but I won't say more about that because that was awesome. But like there's grief in sports, for example. So tune into Griefed Up on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts.
That is amazing. If you ever need guests, I'm not professional at basketball or anything.
You're a goddess, and I would love to have you on the Griefed Up podcast. Obsessed with you.
I appreciate it. And I will just put up there, Love to Love said, thank you, ladies. This was useful. I am so glad. I am sure Rebecca's glad. That was our goal today. So Rebecca, oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This was incredible. And I wish you luck with your new podcast and everything that you're doing with Grieve Leave. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do.
Thank you so much for having me, Brooke. I appreciate you.
Of course. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us on the Mourning Coffee podcast. And I will see you next time.